Flashes ignite like lightning across cold marble. The echo of voices ricochets through the chamber, anxious, restless, hungry for spectacle. Then, slicing through the hum, Elise Stefanik leans toward her microphone, her tone polished to shimmer with impossible sincerity. Jasmine Crockett, she declares, every syllable sharp and deliberate, a true servant of the people. Gasps collide mid-air. A few jaws drop, a few brows tighten. The words hang there, heavier than they should, delicate yet explosive. Cameras lean in as if to taste the meaning. Was that praise or poison? Applause hesitates, laughter catches in throats. Crockett says nothing, for a heartbeat. Her chin lifts almost imperceptibly. The pause is electric. Reporters glance between monitors and faces, terrified to blink. Somewhere across the chamber, someone whispers, "Did she just compliment her?" Another voice, "No. That's shade wrapped in sugar." Twitter erupts before the gavel can strike. Hashtags multiply. Clips spread like wildfire across feeds and timelines. 6 seconds of ambiguity looping endlessly. Commentators scramble for tone analysis, lip-reading experts, body language verdicts. Every rewatch deepens the mystery, that faint smile, that measured blink, that half-beat delay before the word servant. Inside the hall, tension curdles into fascination. STEFANIK'S eyes flicker with the satisfaction of someone who knows she's just dropped a match into dry grass. Crockett, unshaken, pensively taps her notes, as if weighing the gravity of being named something both humble and, in certain mouths, demeaning. Across the nation, immigrant families watching from living rooms feel the sting. How servant can shift meaning depending on who's speaking it. In barbershops, classrooms, kitchens, and choir halls, arguments ignite. Was it mockery or revelation? And in that swirling uncertainty, America watches two women embody opposing interpretations of power, one built on performance, the other on purpose. One seeking applause, the other seeking impact. The clang of the gavel cuts through the noise, but the rupture remains. The room exhales slowly, pretending nothing seismic just occurred. Yet the tremor has already escaped the walls, racing into headlines that will divide the night. Because what looked like a polite remark, barely 10 words long, wasn't just commentary. It was stagecraft. A spark. And what smoldered beneath that single sentence would soon expose far more than either congresswoman ever expected. Outside the chamber, the echo of STEFANIK'S words ricochets through every corridor of power. Staffers whisper in corners, drafting statements, refreshing trending tags like stock tickers. What began as a blip in a hearing is mutating, minute by minute, into a full-blown moral standoff. In today's America, words aren't just sounds, they are missiles, micro-targeted for outrage and influence. Every phrase is dissected, replayed, filtered through ideological lenses until meaning fractures into 1,000 sharp edges. For Elise Stefanik, this is familiar terrain. Once a bright-eyed policy wonk from upstate New York, she learned early that ideals alone don't buy airtime. Over the years, she evolved from intellectual pragmatist into political imagemaker, mastering the rhythm of 20-second clips. Her strategy is clean and clinical: grab attention, guide the narrative, disarm opponents by twisting civility into a weapon. Every tilt of her eyebrow has purpose. Every adjective is chosen to sting softly enough to deny intent but firmly enough to dominate headlines. Her team knows the playbook. A well-timed phrase can reset the news cycle, frame the opponent, and fill donation inboxes overnight. When she drops a line like "true servant," it's never impulsive. It's choreography, an act of psychological theater performed for cameras, not colleagues. Behind the polished grin sits a strategist who has learned that politics today isn't played in committees but on screens the size of a hand. Jasmine Crockett, however, plays a different game. A freshman congresswoman and former public defender from Texas, she embodies the old-school ethic her grandmother used to preach: service is sacred. She's not here for optics. She's here because the people who lined the courthouse hallways back home needed a voice loud enough to be heard through polished lies. When she speaks of serving, it carries the weight of courthouse benches, late-night case files, and communities that know promises often expire right after elections. So when Stefanik uses that same word, the sacred servant, the world trembles on a cultural fault line. One side hears insult, the other hears irony, but for Crockett's supporters, it feels like an attempt to confiscate the very vocabulary of goodness. The clash isn't just personal, it's philosophical. Can service coexist with ambition? Can humility survive in a system addicted to virality? Cable news hosts circle like hawks, re-airing the line with slow-motion precision. Was Stefanik sincere? They ask. Or did she redefine the very essence of political civility? Comment sections swell with think-piece passion. Satirical memes crown Crockett as Captain Servant, while editorial boards debate whether the label was meant to demean or ignite. Meanwhile, in the quiet margin between posts and press releases, both women sit in their offices, miles apart, worlds apart, measuring how this moment might shape their futures. STEFANIK'S advisors whisper that she's won another spotlight. Visibility is currency. Crockett's aides tell her, "Coach, they tried to insult you with respect. Let's make that their mistake." And outside the halls of power, the public feels an unfamiliar stir. The remark that was supposed to humiliate may have backfired, touching a nerve among teachers, nurses, grocery clerks, bus drivers, immigrants, people who live service daily without applause. Because somewhere between sarcasm and sincerity, STEFANIK accidentally cracked open the oldest question in democracy: who truly serves, and who merely performs it? As the digital wildfire spreads, that question begins to glow at the center of the national conversation. Allies rally, critics double down, and both leaders stand on the brink of definition. Before the day ends, one of them will transform a moment of theater into a testament of truth, and the meaning of service in American politics will never sound the same again. Years before the cameras, before the clipped sound bites and orchestrated takedowns, Elise Stefanik walked the quiet paths of Harvard Yard with a notebook full of ideals. Her professors marked her as brilliant, someone who dissected systems, not people. She believed politics could be science, not spectacle, formulas of reform, measurable progress, the soft math of better policy. Back then, she wrote essays on bipartisanship and essays on faith in institutions. Her dream was earnest, unwrinkled by the world. Then she graduated into Washington, D.C., where idealism goes to either evolve or evaporate. The first time she stepped inside a congressional strategy meeting, she noticed something essential: the people most quoted weren't necessarily the best thinkers. They were the best performers. Cameras didn't care who was right, they cared who looked unshakable while claiming to be. So she learned. Quickly. At first, STEFANIK'S rise was built on competence, a whisper of reform, an aura of fresh modern conservatism. She was young but poised, intelligent but careful not to sound like an academic. But what makes a prodigy dangerous is impatience. Each televised panel, each interview, each minor edit by a producer added another layer to her persona until the persona itself became the priority. Efficiency trained her to curate every vowel for optics. It wasn't deception, it was adaptation. The 21st century didn't reward modest service, it rewarded the loudest confidence wrapped in immaculate tailoring. Her circle tightened. Advisors taught her to read public perception the way card players read faces. Outrage drives engagement. One strategist told her over coffee thick with cynicism: if you can provoke without appearing petty, you own the narrative. STEFANIK didn't flinch. She filed that advice under survival. Soon, every misstep became rehearsal. She'd misstate a fact, correct herself with polish, and watch the feeds light up. The algorithm liked her. She liked that the algorithm liked her back. But ambition has its echo. The same calculation that brought applause also brought disquiet. Late at night, when the Capitol dome gleamed against the Black River, she sometimes caught herself wondering whether winning an argument still meant advancing an idea, or merely perfecting her persona. She'd rationalize it: maybe to sustain influence, you had to package principle. Still, the question gnawed at the seams of her poise. And yet, she kept her posture impeccable. She discovered that televised hearings were stages, not sessions. A pointed question could do more for a fundraising surge than a passed amendment. Every confrontation became theater, each exchange crafted for replay, clipped and subtitled with partisan precision. Once, during a heated exchange, an older colleague whispered, "Elise, you make it look effortless." It was the greatest compliment she'd ever received. Her wardrobe evolved along with her tone: structured jackets, deliberate color palettes that whispered authority without risk. Viewers saw the confidence of someone fully formed. They couldn't see the invisible gears, the constant risk calculation turning under the surface. She wasn't improvising, she was composing a brand. The more she mastered the art of public combat, the more she noticed an unsettling paradox. The closer she got to the spotlight, the further she drifted from why she wanted it. Calling out hypocrisy had once been her anthem. Now, her own rhetoric leaned on the very mechanics she denounced. Service became a slogan. She insisted her dedication to the people remained pure, yet her speeches grew more about winning against them than helping them. Still, she believed loyalty was her anchor. Loyalty to party. To the machine that rewarded precision, obedience, and visibility. Legacy could wait, alignment was immediate currency. Within that framework, her language sharpened until empathy became liability. The sheen of confidence hardened into armor. And yet, somewhere beneath the armor, a small contradiction lived on, a faint awareness that presentation without purpose hollows the soul of public life. STEFANIK knew this. She just didn't have time to dwell on it. The next hearing, the next headline, the next camera angle demanded attention. By the time the Crockett exchange approached, Elise Stefanik had become a creature perfectly suited to the moment, fluent in the dialect of polarization, disciplined in the art of grace under fire, and so adept at narrative warfare that sincerity itself felt like an antique luxury. Her weapon wasn't insult but tone, the ability to slice without raising her voice, to smile while introducing friction. To an audience conditioned to reward authenticity yet seduced by drama, she offered both facsimiles at once, a blend of courtesy and competition. The designer suit was more than attire, it was armor forged in ambition, stitched with conviction that control is the highest virtue. And that day, when she uttered the phrase true servant, she didn't miscalculate. She knew the phrase would spark, the exclamation points, the think pieces, the viral loop. She thought she was playing the board as usual, out-strategizing sincerity. But standing across from her was someone who didn't play, someone whose strength wasn't polish but principle, whose authenticity wasn't rehearsed. In the mirror of one freshman lawmaker, Elise Stefanik was about to see the reflection she never expected, unfiltered sincerity. Before the Klieg lights of Congress, before trending hashtags and televised hearings, Jasmine Crockett's world was smaller, but far louder. It was the distant thud of marching feet on Dallas pavement, the humid press of church basements filled with folding chairs and unrest, the hum of hopeful voices trying to rewrite their zip codes into destiny. She came of age in a city stitched together by contradictions, grit and grace, promises and poverty, ambition strapped tightly to survival. Her parents worked hard, not for applause, but for stability. Her grandmother's Bible rested by the door, a dog-eared anchor reminding Jasmine that faith without struggle was just parchment and ink. Every Sunday, she watched elders rise from the pews, prayer in their throats and ache in their bones. They still believed America could bend toward fairness, if only the right hands kept pushing. She decided she'd be one of those hands. Law school wasn't glamour, it was grit. She was one of few young black women in classrooms filled with confidence that came with legacy. Where others quoted theory, she quoted lived reality. She studied not to master loopholes, but to close them. During breaks, she'd volunteer with legal aid clinics, helping tenants avoid eviction notices written in language meant to confuse. She called it translation work, turning law back into plain justice. As a public defender, she faced the daily arithmetic of injustice. Too many clients, too few hours, cases stacked like paperwork skyscrapers. She'd step into court knowing that every minute mattered, that sometimes a single overlooked detail decided the width of a cell. Her co-workers remember those nights she stayed long after the janitorial hum began, her yellow legal pad scribbled with notes and affirmations. They deserve a voice. They deserve tomorrow. It wasn't easy. She faced judges who mistook conviction for arrogance, DAs who smirked when she refused plea deals that smelled of convenience. Yet for every loss, she found redemption in small victories. The shaken hand of a client tasting freedom after years of bureaucratic chokehold, the tearful hug of a mother whose son walked out instead of being locked in. Justice, to Jasmine, was cumulative, built one human outcome at a time. Her activism wasn't rehearsed, it was reflex. When protests erupted over police brutality, she wasn't at a podium, she was in the street, phone in hand, live streaming when the world tried not to look. She stood between officers and kids holding cardboard signs, calm but immovable, voice measured, eyes steady. The Constitution doesn't end at the curb, she'd say, not shouting but ensuring her words cut through panic. The camera caught that steadiness, and thousands who never knew her name saw in her a mirror of courage they hadn't realized they carried. Those moments transformed her. She realized the courtroom could win individual battles, but the law itself needed architects who wouldn't trade compassion for comfort. Friends remember the day she announced her run for Congress. It wasn't dramatic, just a phone call over takeout noodles, her voice equal parts resolve and disbelief. If they won't fix the system, she said, then I will stand inside it. Running for office was another translation project, turning legal advocacy into civic endurance. She knocked on doors in triple-digit heat, waved at strangers from windswept intersections, built her campaign on borrowed faith and tiny donations. Her slogan wasn't catchy marketing, it was a statement of purpose, people first. She meant it literally. When she took her oath and stepped onto the Capitol floor for the first time, the moment carried the weight of every neighbor who'd ever told her, "Make them see us." She promised herself that the marble halls wouldn't polish away her purpose. That her accent, her empathy, and her edge would remain intact. Colleagues learned quickly that Crockett didn't do performative outrage. When she argued, it was with documentation. When she raised her voice, it was because silence had failed too many times. Staffers admired how she treated everyone, from custodians to senators, with unforced respect. Her calendar still included community video calls and late-night check-ins with local organizers. Service wasn't a slogan, it was muscle memory. And yes, even in government corridors heavy with ego, she laughed often. Sometimes too loudly. The sound startled lobbyists who mistook warmth for weakness. But that laughter wasn't frivolous, it was defiance, the human reminder that power shouldn't demand silence to feel respected. Her district loved her for it. Immigrant families saw in her triumph proof that belonging isn't granted, it's claimed. Young women, especially women of color, watched her walk into oversight hearings and saw more than critique. They saw a continuation of their own stories, refracted through authority. Still, she knew the uphill climb. Each mispronunciation of her name, each coded composure critique, each whisper of too passionate, came with invisible weight. Yet she wore those moments like medals, because she knew what they signified. She was unsettling the order that had ignored people like her for decades. So when she sat across from Elise Stefanik that morning, hair immaculate, heart steady, Jasmine didn't see rivalry. She saw ritual. Another test of how much sincerity could survive under fluorescent scrutiny. She was prepared for policy dispute, even sharp disagreement. What she didn't expect was the label, the compliment spoken through a practiced smile that seemed to fold respect into ridicule. A true servant. The phrase landed with the deceptive gentleness of silk disguising steel. Around her, the air tightened. Jasmine caught herself smiling slightly, instinctively, the same way one smiles when lightning flashes too close. For a split instant, she felt all of her histories, courtroom fatigue, protests, the sound of her grandmother's prayers, compress into a single question. What do you do when someone weaponizes your virtue? There, in that pause, time slowed. Cameras zoomed, colleagues glanced, and the moment balanced on the edge between insult and inspiration. Her years of defending the voiceless whispered lessons about dignity inside fury. She inhaled softly, remembering every client who'd been misnamed, misunderstood, misjudged, and every time she taught them how to reclaim the narrative. And so, when STEFANIK'S compliment landed, Crockett had two choices: see it as shade or a spark. The committee room had returned to its ordinary hum, but under that hum was a frequency no one could ignore, the vibration of a confrontation still unfinished. Photographers leaned forward, lenses aimed like telescopes hunting supernovas. Every twitch of an eyebrow, every shuffle of a paper carried the weight of narrative. Elise Stefanik reclined slightly in her chair, fingertips pressed together in studied patience. The word servant hung between her and Jasmine Crockett like a glass ornament, fragile, reflective, still spinning. She waited for critique, for pushback to absorb and redirect, because that was the game: provoke, then pivot. Crockett wasn't biting. Her composure unnerved even her allies. She kept her eyes steady on the chair, nodding faintly as if filing everything for later, each inflection, each performative gesture. The silence she cultivated pressed against the walls. The moderator glanced nervously at the clock, sensing the shift from procedure to theater. "Ms. Crockett," he offered, inviting response. She looked up slowly, like drawing breath for something not yet written. Her voice came soft, velvet over steel. "Funny thing about service," she began. "When you're busy doing it, you don't usually have time to announce it." The crowd inhaled as one. A subtle rebuttal, gentle enough to stay within decorum but pointed enough to pierce intention. Stefanik smiled, the smile that lived somewhere between diplomacy and disdain. "With all due respect," she replied, "some of us show our service so the public can appreciate transparency." A murmur rolled through the seating rows. The click of pens, the whisper of note-taking, reporters texting editors, sound turned into suspense. Crockett leaned forward slightly. "Transparency's noble," she acknowledged, "as long as it's not confused with performance." There it was, the verbal shift, delicate but unmistakable. Stefanik's polished mask flickered, her eyes narrowed by mere millimeters. The audience could almost taste the temperature change. What followed was a volley disguised as dialogue. Stefanik leaned on procedural language and precedent, invoking decorum as shield. Crockett responded with lived reality, stories of constituents, evidence, factual citations sharpened by moral clarity. The exchange became symmetrical warfare, data versus conviction, poise versus authenticity. At one point, Stefanik smoothed her papers, an unconscious tick betrayed by camera zooms projecting live onto millions of screens. "We can debate philosophy all day," she said, voice syruped with practiced authority. "But results, that's what our voters expect." Crockett answered without hesitation. "Exactly. That's why I spend time getting results instead of crafting quotes." Gasps fluttered through the room like released birds. Even those who came only for summaries looked up. A few representatives shifted in their seats, half smiles betraying reluctant admiration. Stefanik tried to recover ground. "I'm glad you're learning the ropes. It takes time to understand institutional discipline." Crockett responded with ease. And it takes courage to change the institution when discipline starts to look like denial. The hearing had become theater now, unscripted, electric, impossible to rewind. Social media moderators cursed under their breath, trying to clip and caption in real time. #ServantShowdown appeared on trending lists within minutes. But inside that room, no tweet could capture the human chemistry unfolding, years of political craftsmanship colliding with unfiltered principle. Elise sat straighter, drawing on the authority that once silenced critics. She began listing policy achievements in the cadence of victory laps. Yet the more she spoke, the more it sounded like resume recitation. Jasmine listened, no interruption, just a slow, thoughtful nod as though each line confirmed her thesis that showmanship had replaced stewardship. The tension crystallized in the air, so thick even the marble seemed to hum. A pen dropped somewhere in the back. The sound was thunder. Finally, Crockett turned, gesturing lightly toward the gallery. "This building was meant for representation," she said. "Not rehearsal." Stefanik opened her mouth to retort, but for once, words hesitated. The cameras caught that silence, a fleeting flicker of recognition that control was slipping. Every person in the chamber felt it, that imperceptible tilt of power when authenticity outshines calculation. Even Stefanik, battle-hardened and media-savvy, sensed it. She adjusted her posture, forced a smile, and tried again to reclaim her narrative. The moderator attempted to move on, but decorum couldn't disguise what had transpired. The public had witnessed a moral duel, truth versus technique. Somewhere, far from the microphones, Crockett's supporters started to gather around live streams, seeing, not hearing, her restraint, the kind of dignity that outtalks rhetoric. In that compressed moment of tension wrapped in quiet confidence, it was clear the storm had only begun. Then, with one sentence, Crockett flipped the entire script. For a heartbeat, the air stood still. Every camera light blinked red. Every journalist's hand hovered mid-note. The echo of the last exchange sank into a thick, unbreathing silence that no one dared interrupt. Jasmine Crockett sat completely still, elbows resting on the wood polished by decades of debates and declarations. In that hush, her composure radiated something ancient, something steadier than politics, deeper than posture. Elise Stefanik watched her carefully, waiting for the rebuttal she could deflect, for anger she could label emotional. But when Jasmine finally spoke, her tone was the sound of calm water after thunder. A voice so even, it made viewers lean in to catch it. "You called me a true servant," she said softly, letting the phrase unfurl like a slow-motion replay. "And I want to thank you." That simple sentence cleaved the silence. Reporters froze. Even Elise blinked, uncertain whether she'd misheard. Members of Congress turned halfway in their seats. Gratitude was not the expected weapon. Jasmine continued, hands folded like a parishioner, but eyes blazing with quiet authority. "Where I come from, being a servant isn't a slur. It's a calling. Service is the spine of every community I've ever represented. My parents served. My teachers served. The neighbors who kept our streets clean, our families safe, our children fed, they served. None of them got headlines. None of them owned podiums. But they built America brick by brick." Her voice gathered momentum, not volume, like steady waves filling a harbor. "So when you call me a servant, I won't correct you. Because those who serve are the backbone of democracy. They're the reason power even has something to stand on." A few rows back, a staffer forgot to breathe. The committee stenographer looked up, stunned. This wasn't rebuttal, it was reclamation. Jasmine's calm dismantled everything Elise had built in subtle arrogance. Stefanik shifted her papers, eyes darting toward the nearest camera. Her practiced smile trembled just enough for lenses to notice. She interrupted, trying to regain footing. "Congresswoman, no disrespect was intended." Jasmine raised a hand, not to silence but to pause. The gesture was imperceptible yet commanding. "It's all right," she said. "Intentions matter less than outcomes. Sometimes what we mean doesn't match what we create. But out of that mismatch, truth can grow." The room murmured, tension turning into something else, not hostility but awe. Jasmine leaned closer to the microphone. "The truth is this, service doesn't mean submission. It doesn't mean inferiority. It means putting your community above your comfort. And if that makes me a servant, then may every seat in this building be filled with more of us." That did it. The crowd's posture changed. Some smiled unconsciously. A slow exhalation of relief and recognition passed through them, the oxygen of decency after the stifling air of showmanship. Elise crossed one leg over the other, rehearsing neutrality, but the muscle near her temple twitched. She opened her mouth to pivot again, then stopped. Nothing she said now could match the moral gravity crystallizing across the room. Crockett went on, voice firming but never rising. When I defended clients who couldn't afford the fees other lawyers demanded, I wasn't doing charity. I was doing my job, serving justice. When I marched with families who wanted police reform, I wasn't courting cameras. I was serving conscience. And when I took this oath, I promised to serve this country even when it stung, even when it mocked me, even when it tried to shrink my worth into a soundbite. Each sentence landed like a steady drumbeat of conviction. She wasn't preaching, she was remembering out loud, and the room listened because truth spoken without anger sounds like prophecy. STEFANIK'S allies shifted, feigning note-taking to mask discomfort. The tension that had once orbited Elise's control now swirled around Jasmine's calm. Where STEFANIK had learned to dominate a room through tone, Jasmine now owned it through stillness. The moment lengthened until it felt cinematic, people muting their phones, the faint click of a recording light punctuating every second. The light itself seemed drawn trembling toward this pivot in human energy. Jasmine smiled faintly. You see, Congresswoman, titles fade. Campaigns dissolve. Accolades gather dust. But the people who serve without cameras, teachers, bus drivers, nurses, janitors, soldiers, parents, they keep this experiment called democracy alive. Without them, this city would be a museum of arrogance. With them, it stays a heartbeat. Her words were both blade and bomb. Somewhere in the back row, an aide mouthed wow. STEFANIK stayed very still, calculating an expression that wouldn't reveal defeat. But her polished confidence had wilted subtly, her eyes darting toward staff as if searching for the next cue card in a show that had lost its plot. Jasmine's gaze never left her. You tried to frame servanthood as a stage direction, she said quietly. I live it as purpose. That's the difference between public image and public service. Several representatives, usually immune to inspiration, nodded unconsciously. The hearing wasn't supposed to get emotional, yet something, dignity maybe, had entered the air like light through dust. And without raising her tone further, Jasmine finished, so if this chamber remembers me as a true servant, I'll be proud. Because history only misjudges those who mistake arrogance for strength. Silence again, but no longer tense. This one carried the weight of realization, the heavy stillness that precedes applause but forbids it in official decorum. The country would later replay this moment thousands of times. The instant Elise STEFANIK'S practiced composure met the immovable force of authentic grace. Finally, the chair stumbled over protocol, thanking the gentlewoman from Texas for her comments, voice quivering with awareness that they had just witnessed something unrepeatable. STEFANIK nodded stiffly, eyes avoiding the screens reflecting her own discomfort. In another time, she might have bantered, might have smirked, might have drawn a clever counterline, but none arrived. All her experience, her tactical eloquence, her choreographed gestures, they collapsed against the wall of sincerity that required no strategy. Photos captured the micro-expressions, Elise's half-blink of confusion, Jasmine's serene half-smile, the room's collective exhale. A moment that began as political warfare had ended as civic renewal. Reporters scrambled out into corridors, calling editors, already writing headlines they barely understood how to phrase. Producers shouted for the clip timestamp. Social feeds flooded with snippets before she had even reached her closing words. But inside the room, for those who lived it without screens, something quieter lingered. It was the sensation of seeing dignity win, not by force but by faith, proof that authenticity still had voltage in a world addicted to noise. STEFANIK gathered her belongings carefully, each motion mechanical. But beneath that choreography, one practiced for years, throbbed an unfamiliar ache, recognition. For once, she hadn't staged the moment, she had been in one, and she'd lost control of it. As Jasmine rose to leave, staffers brushed past with polite, uncertain smiles. Some whispered thank you under their breath. None of them would forget the sight of a woman transforming a slight into scripture. The cameras followed her walk out of the chamber, steady, reverent, like pilgrims tracing the steps of revelation. She reached the exit, paused, glanced back once, not at STEFANIK, but at the seal of Congress shimmering under fluorescent light. The faintest smile curved her mouth, the kind reserved for quiet victories that don't need witnesses. Outside, the evening sun caught her silhouette just long enough for photographers to capture that glow, the radiance of someone who had just turned scorn into testimony. No dramatic gestures. No applause. Just truth performed so gracefully that even cynicism bowed its head. Yet what erupted online that night would transform Crockett's legacy forever. By nightfall, the phrase true servant no longer belonged to the hearing room. It belonged to the internet. Within minutes of adjournment, the clip had escaped official channels, duplicated, subtitled, remixed, memed. The 6-second exchange became an anthem of something larger, one woman's calm dismantling an empire of cynicism. Hashtags multiplied like constellations trying to map meaning. Hashtag servant strength trended first, then hashtag Crockettverse, a galaxy of fan edits where soft piano scores underscored her words. Others called it hashtag Gracegate, feigning scandal, but ironically fueling the myth. Within hours, that single sentence had more reach than most campaigns achieve in a lifetime. Comment sections glowed with fervent self-insertion. "That's my congresswoman, even if she's not from my state," wrote one teacher from Oregon. "She made service sound royal." Another, a retired bus driver, typed, "I never thought I'd hear someone in power talk about work like it matters again." Even skeptics admitted grudging admiration. "Political jujitsu," one strategist tweeted. "She flipped the insult so fast the cameras got whiplash." Then came the reaction videos. Influencers filmed themselves watching the clip, pausing every few seconds to shout commentary. "Wait for it, wait. For it. See that? That's the moment she takes the room." College students staged lip-sync challenges, mouthing Jasmine's calm retort while wearing thrift store blazers. A group of nurses on TikTok filmed a parody titled, "The Overworked Servant's Choir," turning her words into harmony. It wasn't mockery, it was homage through humor. Late-night hosts circled in. One opened with a headline monologue, "America just saw what happens when you bring moral clarity to a political food fight." Another quipped, "If composure were a superpower, Jasmine Crockett just joined the Avengers." The crowd roared. Cable news networks attempted the impossible, spin. On one side, pundits praised her as the embodiment of dignity under fire. On the other, commentators accused viewers of romanticizing tone over policy. But even as they debated, the replay ran behind them in a loop. Jasmine's calm, STEFANIK'S flicker of surprise, the room's collective stillness. It was the kind of footage that refused to fade. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to the moment. One titled Servant or Savior unpacked the symbolism, bringing in theologians, sociologists, former aides. They couldn't agree, but they couldn't stop talking. Every conversation returned to the same astonishment, that civility delivered with conviction could still go viral in a landscape allergic to nuance. Universities hosted impromptu panels. Students quoted Jasmine's phrase, "Service doesn't mean submission," scribbling it on protest posters and dorm whiteboards. Cafeteria conversations bloomed with shared pride, young black and brown students saying, "She sounds like my aunt, my mom, my teacher." It wasn't fandom, it was recognition, the validation of seeing one's grace televised. Meanwhile, STEFANIK'S team scrambled. Their official statement tried to blur the line, claiming her words had always been respectful. But screenshots told a different story, the frozen half-smirk, the arched brow. Commentators memed it ruthlessly. One viral tweet captioned her image, "When your shade grows roots." Another simply posted a still of Jasmine's serene expression with the text, "The calm before the clapback heard round the world." Even brands joined the wave. A coffee company tweeted, "Brew truth. Serve others." A sneakers brand launched a limited servant leader campaign within 48 hours. The commodification was inevitable. When sincerity becomes trending texture, everyone wants a sip. Yet beneath the noise, the human ripple stretched deeper. Local community centers in Dallas hosted screenings celebrating their hometown representative. Elders wept quietly as her speech replayed. One woman whispered, "My daughter's watching this instead of despair." Faith leaders cited her composure in Sunday sermons, using it as proof that principled service could still shine inside flawed institutions. Through screens and headlines, people felt tethered to something rare, a glimpse of politics unstained by cynicism, where decency didn't flinch under scrutiny. For the progressive, immigrant-proud, justice-hungry crowd, Jasmine had become more than a politician. She was a vessel for possibility. But virality is double-edged. Supporters celebrated, detractors mobilized. Comment threads soured in the usual choreography of division. "She's weaponizing kindness," one critic wrote. Others accused her of over-dramatizing. Yet even these rejections only amplified reach. The algorithm doesn't know morality, it only recognizes momentum. And Crockett's moment had become unstoppable momentum. Inside her district office, team members scrolled through an avalanche of messages. The inbox overflowed with interview requests, art tributes, donations. One staffer laughed through tears, "Ma'am, even Beyoncé's stylist posted your speech." Another added quietly, "You just made honesty fashionable again." Cable analysts predicted career elevation, endorsements, maybe a book deal. Fans fantasize slogans, "Serve boldly. Crockett 2028." The internet, fickle yet fevered, had chosen its hero. And yet, far away from the trending chaos, Jasmine sat alone that night, on her couch, shoes kicked off, phone silent except for the steady ding of incoming tags. On television, her own face looped endlessly. She stared at it with the dazed disbelief of someone recognizing themselves in a mirror they didn't build. Her speech had been instinct, not calculation. Now it was trending mythology. And as pride mingled with unease, she whispered into the stillness, "What if this isn't about me?" Because for all the jubilation online, she sensed something fragile beneath it, a hunger for integrity so starved that one act of grace could be mistaken for miracle. She wondered what that said about the state of the nation she'd vowed to serve. Outside, the city lights blinked like restless notifications. Her mention count climbed by the thousands. Graphics proclaimed her voice of a generation, the servant who spoke for us all. But Jasmine knew hero worship is a weight, not a wound. She leaned back, exhaling slow, remembering her grandmother's words, "When they call you servant, be proud, but never forget who you're serving." It echoed now like counsel from another lifetime. Her phone vibrated again, a text from an old mentor, "You've started something. Make sure it stays service, not spectacle." Jasmine closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd have to step back into the storm she accidentally called down. But tonight, in the soft hum of viral fame and moral yearning, one truth flickered above the noise. Authenticity, even in the smallest dose, had proven more contagious than outrage. And while the internet crowned her a hero, Jasmine Crockett herself wrestled with a deeper realization. 2 weeks later, the storm of hashtags began to settle into something steadier: legacy. The flash of viral fame had dimmed, replaced by the quiet hum of impact. And Jasmine Crockett, now synonymous with composure and grace, found herself standing not in front of cameras, but before a gymnasium full of students, city workers, and neighbors in the district that raised her. It was career day at a local high school, unplanned, unpretentious, just how she wanted it. She didn't stride to the microphone as a celebrity. She walked slowly, smiling at the rows of faces: immigrant families, janitors in uniform, teachers clutching coffee cups, kids who had memorized memes of her moment but didn't yet know its meaning. She took a breath, letting silence find its rhythm again. "A few weeks ago," she began softly, "someone called me a true servant." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Everyone knew the story. At the time, it was meant as a jab, or so it sounded. But I've had time to think. And I decided that being a servant is not a label to escape. It's a standard to live by. She paused, watching the crowd lean in. "You see, my grandmother used to tell me, 'Baby, if serving is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you.' I didn't fully understand it until that hearing. That word reminded me who I am, and who this country needs all of us to be." The murmurs quieted into reverent stillness. Her tone shifted from personal to collective. Service isn't weakness. Service is courage in work clothes. It's standing up when it's unpopular. It's choosing decency when noise is the easier option. We've made the mistake of thinking leadership is about volume, about being the loudest in the room. But America's story was never written by loudness alone. It was written by hands that built hearts that taught, souls that cared. The audience nodded, many smiling through recognition. She continued, her voice warmer, near musical. "When I worked as a lawyer, the people who inspired me weren't the ones giving press conferences. They were the ones giving second chances. Teachers who refused to let one bad grade define a student, nurses who stayed an extra shift, volunteers handing out water bottles on 100-degree protest days. They never got celebrated. But they're the reason I believe in this flag, in this democracy, in this experiment of ours." The gym's fluorescent lights seemed to soften, the hum of the air conditioner blending with her momentum. "So, if I have a platform now, I want to use it for this truth. Greatness isn't measured by how many you command, but by how many you lift. The janitor who keeps the hall safe is part of America's infrastructure just as much as the president signing bills. The caregiver, the soldier, the student translating for their parents. They are the steady heartbeat that makes this nation breathe." She let the word sink, then smiled again, gentle but firm. "And if calling me a servant reminds anyone that service still matters, then I'll wear that word like armor. We've all seen what arrogance does to our politics. Maybe it's time humility takes a turn at the microphone." Applause began hesitantly, then grew into something thunderous. Hand claps merging with cheers, students rising to their feet. Crockett waited, humbly gesturing for quiet. She wasn't posing, she was participating in a shared awakening. When the sound ebbed, she leaned back toward the mic with a trace of humor. "I didn't go viral because I shouted louder. I went viral because I didn't need to. And maybe that's the lesson we can carry forward. When you live your values long enough, they'll speak for you." Every head turned toward her now, drawn into the emotional symmetry of the moment. The once digital drama had returned to flesh and presence, to real people feeling seen. She closed with a steady gaze that folded the crowd into intimacy. This country will always test us, our patience, our faith, our empathy. But if we keep choosing to serve one another instead of stepping on one another, no insult can harm us and no headline can define us. Because service, she said, her voice softening into finality, isn't about status. It's about soul. The room erupted again, louder this time. Teachers clapped until their palms reddened. Students waved their phones, recording a new moment worth keeping. The roar was less about fame than about collective relief, that decency still drew a crowd. And as the applause faded, one message echoed far beyond politics. History, it turns out, loves irony. A remark meant to diminish ended up defining a movement. When Elise Stefanik called Jasmine Crockett a true servant, she unknowingly passed her opponent the very torch she long pretended to hold, one lit by purpose, not performance. And Crockett, rather than throwing that torch back, lifted it high enough for a new generation to see its glow. Across the nation, young leaders replayed that moment and found something they didn't know they were starving for: grace that didn't apologize for itself, conviction that didn't need volume to feel powerful. In classrooms and campaign offices, from small towns to city councils, people whispered a quiet promise: serve like her. Because that's what real legacy is: not domination, not victory laps, but transference. One act of dignity inspiring thousands of smaller acts, collective decency, civic rebirth, a moral reset long overdue. For every cynic declaring that politics is lost, her story stands as counter-evidence carved in calm. So as this episode closes, consider the title not as a headline, but as an invitation. Elise Stefanik says Jasmine Crockett a true servant. She meant it one way. History heard it another. Now it belongs to everyone who chooses service over spectacle, principle over posture. Carry that forward. In your classroom, your workplace, your neighborhood, be the proof that humility still has force. Share her story not just online but in action. Lead by lifting. Stand firm but kind. Because dignity, when practiced loudly enough, becomes contagious. And long after the microphones switch off and the timeline scroll on, that quiet revolution, the one measured in empathy, not applause, keeps burning. The light of service never really dims, it multiplies, one steadfast soul at a time.